Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome to an unboxing video of Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich. This is published by GMT Games. It's a co-design between the late Chad Jensen and John Butterfield, with help from Kai Jensen, Chad's wife. When Chad Jensen passed away, he had completed much of this game in terms of the cards, the design, etc., but no rule book and some of the mechanics polished, etc. So John Butterfield stepped in and helped publish the game and write the rule book, and had heavy influences just kind of into how it all came together. So a great joint venture honoring one of Chad Jensen's designs that he was working on. This is a game that I think will probably be looked back upon for 2023 as one of the better releases that we see this year, just basing that off of the hype and reception that it seems to be receiving. I myself am really looking forward to getting it to the table and putting some time into it this holiday season. When we look at it, it ships in a pretty standard GMT 2-inch box. On the front, actually, I want to go back to that. I gotta say, without even opening the box, the box art and just kind of the cover in totality. The art is done by Marcos Villarroel, and I apologize if I'm getting that incorrect, Marcos. But the impression the box has, I gotta say, this might be my favorite kind of box cover of the year and maybe beyond. It just really stands out, I feel. When we look at the back of the box, we see a nice little preview of the game map itself, some of the cards that are used in the game, the different counters. And then when we get to the summary, we see that it is a 2-player game, 6 to 12 hours. So some of the scenarios you can complete in a longer sitting face-to-face. The complexity is at a 5. That seems about right. Solitaire, a lot of folks are saying that the solitaire suitability rating on this is actually too low. And one of the reasons for that is just, although it does not have a dedicated solitaire bot or system, it really goes back and forth so quickly, and there isn't too much hidden information. It seems quite soloable. So I'm looking forward to trying that myself. In the game, you are playing as one of 2 sides. What's unique, though, is that there are actually 4 factions in the game. So each player controls 2 factions. The player who is taking the role of the Western Allies plays as the Western forces, the Commonwealth, British, United States, etc., as well as playing as the German OKH, which was the Eastern military forces of the Third Reich against the Soviet Union. Whereas the Soviet Union player plays, of course, with their own forces, but also with those of the OKW, which were the Third Reich's forces and allied nations in the Western theater. So this presents a pretty unique situation where you as the player, you're both playing against the Third Reich, the Axis forces, and that's kind of where the name comes from, Downfall. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be in a better position than your allies. The Western allies want to be in a better position at the end of the game than the Soviets. It's not so much about, hey, can we defeat the Third Reich? That's a foregone conclusion as part of the premise of this game. What it reminds me a lot of, actually, is Churchill, which is a 3-player multiplayer game by Mark Herman. And in that, the 3 players are playing as the British, the Americans, and the Soviets. And the entire game is just who can be best positioned coming out of World War II. So it's very likely, if not foregone, that you will, defeat the Japanese and the Nazis, but you you're more so trying to make sure that you know that the United States reigns supreme or the Soviet Union reigns supreme at the end of the day. Now, before we dive into this, I gotta say too that it's a 2-map game, so it's not a single map. But even with that, the dimensions come out to be, when it's all put together, 44 inches by 34. So it's still a pretty decent size. Most dining tables, most gaming surfaces will be able to accommodate that. And also I'll comment that when we look at the map, you'll see this. Most of the track and supplemental information really is kept on the map. So you're not going to find yourself with a whole bunch of play sheets that are keeping track of counters off to the side. Really, it's focused on the map itself. So in a second here, let's dive right on in. We'll open up the box now. Very careful as we cut through the shrink. Right. Got it pretty good with this game. We'll toss that to the side and open it up. I will start by going straight for the map, so we can begin there, and we'll let that backdrop too as we go through some of the other components. Looking at the map here, so this is the western portion of the map, and it's a good place to start. At the very top of the map, we have what's the initiative track. So this is really kind of how turns proceed, where the 4 factions each have their own counter, and you proceed along the initiative track, and you spend initiative points to do different orders or actions. The player or faction, is better termed, is with the lowest initiative position on the track will be the person then that is active and playing at present. So if the Soviets had the fewest initiative points here on the track, they would take their turn. They may jump ahead of, say, the OKH, and then the OKH takes their turn, etc. So it's a nice kind of way of balancing how much can you do in each order and action phase, and try to leverage the most out of every sequence of play. Below that, on the turn track, we see the game does have 8 turns, and each turn is covering a total of 4 months. And within those 4 months, there are 3 different weather periods that occur. So the weather resets 3 different times, and it's on this set schedule. And of course, the weather has some effects on your superiority, fighting, etc. To the right of that, we see one of the 3 strategic tracks. So there's strategic bombing, Battle of the Atlantic, and towards the bottom of the map, you have Siege of Malta. So these are tracks for keeping track of, boy, isn't that a saying, of larger, more strategic focuses that don't play out so well on the hex and counter map, such as, you know, the strategic bombing of Germany. We also have on the left here a track for different victory point locations. And to the right of that, we have our action track. So different actions will be drawn randomly and placed here on the action track. And when it is your turn, you can take an action, which will have a cost in terms of initiative, to add it then to your available orders that you can execute. When you look at the map, it really is quite pleasant, and I love, you can notice really a lot of details. I'll position it just a little more here where we're looking at France and Greater Germany. You see the red outlines for different victory locations, but you also have a number of different kind of, I don't know if demarcation's the right, but for different scenario setups, it will kind of outline where that begins. It also separates out, of course, the different nations. When we're looking at this, we see not too much variety in different kind of terrain types, but there are some. So, of course, forest, hill, rough terrain, mountains, etc. So now that we've had a look at a map, let's dive into some of the other game components that come in the box. We'll start with the rulebook, which again, this is pretty much entirely Mr. Butterfield, as when he came into the project, this had not been started, and he worked on it with Kai Jensen. Going through, we have a nice little table of contents. We see that in terms of actual rules, we're probably at 37 pages before we start to get into example of plays, indexes, and such. So that's a decent sized rulebook these days. Introduction, just talking about the game. Course of play, I mean, there's not really a turn sequence, I believe, that's in the rulebook, but this course of play, this is kind of the equivalent. And it is really this straightforward in terms of how all the turns in play progress throughout. We look a little bit at different terms from the game, and I love how this is laid out. One of the first sections in the rulebook takes the complete map of the game and walks you through all the different parts of the map and how they work. So instead of, flipping to section 3.8 to learn about zones of control, so much of your understanding as you read through the rulebook can be done through this translation of all the different parts of the map. The page count, too, really isn't as significant when you look at this and see just how much art and graphic are representing different concepts and examples of play. That really does make it easier to go through the rule book and understand the different mechanics. We get into all the different tracks here, explaining how those work. And then we start to get into all the different playing components. So the counters themselves, how to translate what everything on them means. And we will also get into how those different units function. So for example, here's how partisan units will function. We then get into some of the cards and naval units that come with the game. Excuse me, actually, it looks like here the cards really begin. So we have event cards, but then we also have action cards. So events are going to be going through constantly on a little bit of a schedule. I believe it's 3 that you have at any given time that are impacting the game, whereas action cards will be in your hand to try to influence the game turn and sequence of events. Talking about initiative and the action rounds, and you can just see so many graphics. Really, this reduces what the total page count is in terms of depth or how much text there is to read when so much is the visuals. It's very nice, all very well done in color as well. This is not a glossy finish. This is more of a matte finish, I will say. I rather prefer that usually with the rule books, to have a matte color finish. The gloss sometimes is on a lighter stock, I find. We go through a little bit more on the different operations and what each of them translate to. So for example, one of the actions is to recruit, and here it explains that process. Really well done, this seems. Then we get into combat. Now I know in one of the play aids, you can pretty much use the play aid, and the combat resolution table has enough printed on it where you can almost just ignore this entire section as feedback that I've heard. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say ignore. More so, you don't need to go back to the rulebook to reference how land combat works, is what I've been told. It's all really quite well done on the play aid itself. All the different events, this talks about that sequence and how to resolve them. We get into supply, which is a concept. I was a little surprised how much detail there is around supply for such a strategic level game. but it does seem quite present. And then we get into how victory works. Here are examples. So this is an example of the Battle of Stalingrad. Here's one where OKH attacks partisans. And then here is one where it just looks like combat for the south of France. Wonderful design notes here. And then a nice index. Always good to see a healthy index to find what you need in the rulebook itself. On the back, a little summary of the map key terrain effects chart, you could maybe call it, as you see the different movement costs here and effects on combat. So, very well put together rulebook. Set that aside. All right, let us now get into some of the play aids. So this is the first player aid card. Here we see, when I was discussing with the land combat, you can see the full sequence here. Now land combat, you find yourselves not with necessarily odd ratios, but rather it uses a differential between forces. So you find what the difference in strength is between the forces, apply any die roll modifiers, and then you have a translation of results there. On the back, we have some understanding of key concepts, how zone of controls work, supply, etc., partisan warfare. It looks like there's a nice little dedicated section too. So, yeah, for example, it looks like with partisans, you probably do a die roll to determine where the partisans will be successful. So, nice that we have that. It does come with 2 of these same player aids, so 1 for each player. Good to stay consistent there. Now this next stack, let's see. So this is all the different orders, and on the left here we see what their initiative cost is, but then we have a definition of what that order does. This is well done where, you know, if you're playing as the Western Allies, you have both your Western Ally orders, but also your OKH orders all on the same page, easy to understand. On the back, as expected, you have the same exact format for the Soviets and the OKW, and then a second sheet that is identical. Now we get into, setup cards. So this is very nice. There are quite a few setup cards. There's a total of 6 setup cards, it looks like. They are double-sided as well. So we can see here, this is for the campaign game. So that's 1 for campaign, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like 4 different setup cards probably for each scenario, and then they're double-sided. Very nice. I believe it's 3 scenarios, Husky, Overlord, and then campaign, I believe. But it's just nice that this is, you know, again, in color, easy to find the particular counters that are needed for the setup. And the quality, this is a very heavy gloss finish stock as well. Same with the other play aids. Really pretty good weight to it. Moving on now to the counters. This is what I was particularly excited for. They're already rounded. So as much as I do love clipping games, you sometimes get a little behind and you wonder, am I spending more time clipping than I am actually at the table with some of these games? So it's occasionally nice to just have a game that comes with pre-clip counters. This is a pretty good weight to the counter sheet as well. I mean, this is heavier than what you might see in, say, a Compass or MMP game, I'd say. And a lot of empty space where, you know, it's not leveraged. So they really probably have exactly what you need in terms of counters. There's not a lot of extra to try to store. Here we have, it looks like OKH, OKW counters. And then here we have some Soviet. We'll just try here with one of the blinks to punch it out and see how it goes. Yeah, very, very clean. Just a little there, but no, that's a very good finish for a counter. Let's see if we can put that back in. All right. So there are the counter sheets. Next up in the box is the second map. So this is detailing the Eastern Theater, excuse me. So I'll just toss this out here. So you can see it doesn't go too far into the Soviet Union. Obviously, you've got out to Moscow and Stalingrad, but really there isn't too much to the east of that. The game timing really is set towards to be the peak of the Third Reich, so there's not really much opportunity for them to advance against either of the human players. They are pretty much on the defensive. They are at their strongest, but they are on their defensive really throughout the game. It's nice to see here we have a little Ziploc with some storage baggies. Always good to have extras of those for games that don't provide them. Quite nice that we get 4 colored dice as well, 2 green, 2 red. So that's good quality there. And then we have a couple of card decks. So I think they must be mixed with action and event cards within the same. Let's go ahead and open these up real quick, or see if we can. There we go. Just see what some of these look like. It's I don't know, they feel just maybe a little lighter than I remember in some other GMT games such as Churchill. There are a lot of them though. It is a lot of cards here. The quality is good. I'm not trying to complain on that. So these are all Soviet action cards. And we can see too in the rule book, you know, all these different icons will translate. So for example, this is a +1 DRM, I believe. And then here it looks like depending on where it's played and at what time, it has different effects. And then here we get into the event cards. So action cards and then event cards. So these play through in a bit of an order. Again, you always have 3 at any given time. I'm going to leave the other sealed for now. We'll set those aside. And then that is to the end of the box. We have an insert in here, which I will be replacing with a counter tray, I am quite sure. The only other thing, actually, let's go back to the counter sheets, as I didn't spend too much time on this. So the counters in the particular units, you know, we're so used to in Hex and Counter wargaming of the NATO icon or symbol, and then below that a couple of numbers for, you know, attack strength or efficiency, and then movement, range, etc. With these, the design is a little different and unique, so I just want to call it out. Here we have, let's pick on this particular unit here in the middle, an infantry unit, and you see these pips around it. The orientation indicates what the strength or remaining quantity is left in the unit. So 1 strength, 2, 3, kind of like step losses maybe in some other games. We have what the unit name is itself, as well as a flag for saying this is a Soviet Union unit. And then, for example, the gold stars, those are, I believe, elite or kind of shock forces. So it's unique that it's a little different than your normal combat value, movement point rating, etc. in terms of the displays on the counters. So with that, we'll bring the video to a close. I'm very excited for this. The buzz around the game is great. The mounted maps that are an option from GMT actually sold out quite quickly, but they are going on reprint. The game at time of recording is still available on GMT, and it should overall be a great game for the next couple of years. I think it'll be pretty popular. I'm excited to try a little bit of it solitaire, but also I think it'll be great to try to do some face-to-face. I could see this being a very popular game at conventions as well. Well, please do let me know what you think of the game if you've had a chance to play it, or if you're looking at making the purchase. We'll try to answer any questions you may have, but I need to get into it myself. And as always, strategy gamers, just hoping you have yourselves an excellent day. Bye now.